Well, welcome everyone that is watching today on Facebook and Zoom to our this week's Truett Church Network webinar. Today we have Lauren Weber with us. Lauren, welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me.
We're so glad you can join us. We have a mutual friend in Dr. Mandy McMichael, who will be our webinar guest tomorrow, where she's going to solve for us once for all the debate between science and faith and the frustrations therein. So we're looking forward to her answering all of our questions.
I'm so
But
glad that to her.
yeah, exactly. This the little stuff she's going to handle. But she referred me to you, and I'm so glad she did for this webinar. And so we haven't met in person, even though we work probably 100 yards apart. But I've enjoyed communicating with you about this and exciting for this time. Could you just share maybe a little bit with those watching about kind of who you are and your background?
Sure. Thanks for having me. I'm a practitioner. I told Mandy, I said, okay, I am a voice science nerd. I love all things and singing, but I'm not a medical doctor, so I'm really happy to be here. I teach at Baylor in the theater department. I've been leading church choirs since 2003. And direct musicals. I did a master's of music and a master's of fine arts in musical theater. And then I got into vocology in the last kind of 5 years, which is the study of voice science. So I read all the voice science articles I can and just try to understand. The singing voice is so fascinating. I think it's one of the most interesting things God created, and I love learning about it. So this has been an interesting time as science kind of tries to figure out what we're going to do about singing.
Excellent.
I'm also the music director at St. Paul's, so Episcopal Church here in Waco. Sorry, I should have mentioned that.
So you wear a few hats then. You have a few things going on.
Yeah, I like to stay busy.
Well, that's wonderful. Well, and that's right. I think that makes you just a great voice for this particular conversation, which most of our audience week to week are practitioners and congregations, volunteer paid, others that care deeply about congregational ministry, but want the best information we can to navigate this sort of, for us at least, unprecedented time. So I think you're right in line with what we need today. Well, good. Well, thanks again for being with us. I know things are crazy busy with family and work and everything for all of us. So anyone that takes some extra time to share with others, we're very appreciative of.
Oh, I'm happy to be here. I have a 11-month-old, a 4-year-old, and a 6-year-old, so hopefully won't be interrupted. But it's the new world we're in.
Well, the whole group can be praying for you during this time then. So we want to talk about kind of best practices as we move toward reopening at various levels, various stages, depending on where you are in your particular church and any number of factors. But first, maybe let's talk about a little bit what's going on right now, because congregational worship, singing in particular, choirs, all of it is about as challenging, among the most challenging aspects of this time where we're all worshiping on our couches at home. So maybe a little bit about what your church is doing and where have you seen creativity, where have you seen the spirit at work of churches helping their people sing during this time?
Yeah, it is a challenge, to be sure. And I've been inspired, thankful, and impressed by the way people have kind of jumped in with both feet into this challenge and the number of creative solutions. We've seen worships on Zoom, Facebook, YouTube, all the different things, and they're being done in so many different ways. The choirs having choir rehearsal maybe via Zoom, where members from past years all over the world have been able to join back. And that's been kind of really neat. These virtual choirs have popped up, which is a lot of work, but just a really neat kind of outcome. I think we're seeing the way that artists have been created to be creative in their very essence and their thinking. I think there's really cool things happening in sound technology that's working on reducing latency. The amount of growth that we've seen in that since February has been really cool. We're going to see some really neat things coming, I think, on that front. We've had choirs rehearsing outside, small barbershop quartets, singing from windows, just YouTube concerts. We've seen it all. St. Paul's has gone to kind of a singer priest situation, but everyone's singing because we really want the communal singing of the hymns so that it's not as performance, doesn't feel as much of a performance in that way. And that's been nice. So we're picking really familiar hymns that can be sung a cappella, that, you know, everyone hopefully can sing from home, as opposed to one person that's got a really good voice singing loudly. But we've seen it all. And I think that worship can be done in many different ways. I'm loving it all. The pre-recorded that looks like you're, you know, kind of in the church, the pre-recorded that's got lots of after processing, and the pre-recorded that's just really raw. And then the live, kind of like we're doing it at St. Paul's, but it's live in the watching. So yeah, it's just seen so many creative outcomes, and I think some of that will stick around probably. Even as we move back together, especially with the singing kind of challenges that come.
Yeah, I go to Calvary. My family and I do Calvary Baptist in Waco. And so Dr. Randall Bradley leads the worship. He and his son have been leading it from their piano at home on Facebook, and their dog Lulu joins. And so Lulu has become the star of the show. And my daughter and I were at Sonic during Sonic Happy Hour last week, and we spotted Lulu across the way with Dr. Bradley's son. And she was literally starstruck of like, it's Lulu, it's Lulu. So any number of things can happen during worship these days. But
joyful noises, all kinds of joyful noises. Yeah.
it is a secret ambition of mine to be on a virtual choir. I don't read music and I don't sing particularly well. I just want to be one of the little squares up there. I've loved the virtual choirs.
Well, Matt, I think we can make that happen. You know, there's lots of different ways, and you get enough voices, it's gonna be fine. We can fix a lot of that in post. So.
All right, we'll talk later. So, you know, as happened yesterday in Texas, at least, and many other places, states are slowly opening back up. I think now 49 out of 50 states are having some form of opening back up. In Texas, where we are, Governor Abbott is not opening churches further up, still limited to 25% capacity. So pastors, congregations, leaders are all asking that question of when. As much as some of us have appreciated online church, we're also ready to gather back together and realize there's a lot of beauty to online gathering, but it's no substitute. I mean, what issues should leaders be considering regarding as we look toward gathering back together, particularly in regards to singing?
Yeah, so I'm just a practitioner, but I'll share with you. May 5th, there was a webinar put on by the National Association of Teachers of Singing, and they combined with the American Choral Directors Association, kind of the big choral associations, to bring in some medical experts. We had Dr. Don Milton, who does research in infectious bioaerosols, and then they had Dr. Halstead, who was a laryngologist, present. And so their findings weren't great, honestly, for singing. The science right now is on singing pretty interesting, and not as encouraging as I would hope. In that, what they're finding is that aerosols, singers, we've trained our whole lives to be super spreaders. You know, we breathe deeply and we project with all of our might. And so the 6 feet that we kind of think about in social distancing, in singing, we're finding can be up to 16 feet, which is just a lot farther. And, you know, would kind of take a whole football field to put a choir out there, you know, in that kind of spacing. I think they're going to link the Nats chat. It's open and online, as well as many other resources if you're interested in more of the scientific kind of things that they've found. Of course, there are multiple sides to all of this, but, you know, we're just doing the best we can with what we know right now. I think one of the concerning things has been the several cases of choirs that have gathered together, like in Washington State. They gathered together thinking everyone was healthy. They used Clorox wipes, they brought their own music, and then 3/4 of the choir got infected. And that caused them to look into this super spreading kind of phenomenon and why exactly is singing raising these risks. So yeah, I think right now science is saying that singing is not safe. And so we have to really start to think about what that means as we open back up, because that doesn't mean everything's not safe. I don't think music is canceled in churches or in general, but I do think we have to be careful as we look at that and think about, you know, where we are in the country is going to make a really big difference, where your personal community is, what your space looks like. Our very long, narrow nave that is so old doesn't have near as much space as a large auditorium that was built out of a, you know, old grocery store or something. You've got really different environmental things that are coming through there.
So 16 feet. One of the, you shared some of this with me before, and I've been reading through it last night and this morning. What effect did they have much on of what effects masks have on that?
Yeah, so when I went on this webinar on May 5th, I was like, okay, they're going to tell us to wear masks and the face shield and be behind a drum shield, and we're going to have all these tools. Right now, the science isn't saying that that's going to be the thing that helps. So we've got the difference between droplets and aerosols. And the droplets are going to fall about 3 feet. Those aerosols are going to continue to be spread depending on your ventilation system. And that masks, N95 masks, have a really good, if they've been medical tested, rate. But they're really hard to sing with. They can be difficult and actually dangerous for some people for breathing. I'm personally a proponent of masks, but we aren't finding the science to say that masks are going to help us not spread or not be super spreaders in singing.
Because of the projection with that, and some of it is saying in aerosol form, with a circulation system, it can stay for hours. Is that correct?
Yeah, so it's looking like about 3 hours, which is just a long time. And if we think about the average choir rehearsal for a church choir, if it's gonna hang 12 to 16 feet and then be circulated for 3 hours, that's a real long time. There's some research that hasn't been peer reviewed yet that looks like humidity and heat will play a difference in how long that stays around. The laryngologist, Dr. Halstead, did say she thought outside in the right conditions could be a good option, but you never know where wind is going to take those spreads as well. I know people have talked about all kinds of creative solutions to that, but yeah, it's not great news for us in the singing community.
So, and if you have questions, those that are watching, ask those in the chat feature, and toward the end, we'll get to as many of those as we can. So you may be having questions as Lauren is talking that I am not smart enough to ask, but I know there's a lot of music people on here asking better questions than I am. So please feel free to ask those, and we'll get to as many as we can. So given that state, and again, it brings up some things we'll talk about tomorrow, right? Some of our distrust of science, what sources to trust. So a little plug for our discussion tomorrow. That's kind of what we're getting into. How do you know you're getting good information, and how do we remain unified when we disagree over the information we receive? Hear me say, I agree with you. I'm not saying that at all. That's why we're doing this. So what might be some best practices or some encouragement, some things to be thinking about as we will start gathering many churches in the next few weeks of how we need to be thinking about this?
Yeah, I think it's important. The webinar was pretty disheartening and hard for my community, the church community, the choral community, voice teachers all around. But I think the follow-up and the aftermath of that has been, singing's not going anywhere and the arts aren't going anywhere, and we have survived many trial and tribulation. And I think this idea that we kind of have to take this trust that faith can take the lead here, and that we can only do the best we know with the best we can with what we know. And that, they're going to be the thing about research and science right now is every day there's new information coming out. So I can't, Dr. McMichaels is one of my favorite people, one of my best friends, and wonderful. So I'm sure she'll have wonderful ways to help you on that. But I think it's helpful to stay in the know of where we are today and where your community is, thinking about your local experts and how they can help guide your community, because it's going to look very different, thinking about your space and your congregation and what kind of their individual needs are. If science is saying right now it's not safe to sing together, then are we going to see a rise of guitar choruses and a resurgence of handbell choirs? Are we going to see virtual choirs continue and being projected? So we're still getting, because I think of singing in the church as vertical and horizontal, and that praise is happening regardless, but that horizontal reach and support and uplifting of each other feels hard through a screen, and we know that in many ways, not just singing. So how are we going to find that vertical reach and that support in this? Does it become something that there is a soloist, as opposed to, I was talking about, we've been really going to a congregational singing, but maybe a soloist that can be, much further away than everyone else, that it does become that kind of worship thing. It become a hybrid thing where it's a spoken service and that night there's a virtual Zoom sing along, or, one way kind of thing. Do we see both kind of continue until we move into a safe place? Are people moving locations or moving outside for, things like that? Do we have woodwinds playing instead of voices singing? We will not be in this place forever. And I have to hold on to that hope and know that that's kind of where we are. But since right now the science is saying it isn't safe to sing together, we just have to be creative, I think, continue to be creative in the ways that we move forward.
And I think that's a good word, because I think many of us, if we look back at what we were doing or our churches were doing week 1 and 2 in March, is probably different than we're doing now. We've evolved and we've responded and reacted and we've built on. And so this is just the next step in that, perhaps. And, I even wonder, even as you're talking about more contemplative practices, if we have worship on the screen, if we can't respond in song, which is how most of us are trained and used to responding, how might we respond in prayer with guided questions, that there's other opportunities there. My family's love the Disney sing-along, so we've really got into those. So I'm sure the worship sing-alongs would also go well. We've done a few of those as well. Any other thoughts before we get to some questions, just on encouragement or what you were learning and considering about this during this time?
Yeah, I think this time has been a time that I've been called to think about my calling. And what I realized is I feel very called to this ministry, but really I'm called to the people, and the music is just the vehicle in which I've been gifted to reach. And so thinking about, this connection and my calling to keep these people in my prayers and keep connected with this group, knowing the importance that singing has psychologically and physiologically on people, can help us reach out. So it's been a good kind of redefining of me. Like my purpose isn't gone if there's not church choir for a while. And it doesn't mean that my ministry is less. It just means it looks different right now, that I'm being called to something different, but I'm still called to support and reach out and help that vertical support. And as we continue to find ways to lift our voices. There's so many verses in the Bible about singing. I believe we were created to sing. I can't not sing. It's going to be really interesting to see how we move forward, but it's okay to grieve, and then it's great to move forward and to think about what's next, and that it's going to keep changing, and that's what kind of we've been called to right now.
And I think that's part of what I've discovered as well during this time. The way I miss live preaching, the way I miss gathering physically with my church family and other friends, the way I miss singing isn't just about habit and tradition. It's deeper. It's at the soul level of we're meant to do this. We're called to do this. It's good when we do this. And I think even in our mourning and our grief, it's wonderful to rediscover that and have kind of those checks of like, we're not doing this just because I grew up doing it and I, feel guilty if I don't, or something like that. No, this is deeply holy and wonderful. And that may perhaps even that's something to lean into, to embrace that grief as a positive sign of what's coming down the road. All right, so we have some questions coming in on a very practical level. How do you put together a virtual choir? I know that's probably a whole long thing, but any quick answer just on how that works?
So it's time consuming, especially the first time you do it. I can actually send, Matt, if you want, I can send some links to some people that have kind of given some nice, easy tutorials. There's many different ways that you can go about it. There's, things that are pre-done for you. You can do it more simply, or so I'd be happy to send some of those so people can dig in if they're interested in that. I do think it's kind of a novelty. People love it or hate it, but it's been a neat way of connecting. So I'd be happy to send those, and you can maybe post those to the Facebook later.
That would be very helpful. Yeah, even for me, that would be interesting. But I think because you have big churches with budgets and tech people and small churches trying to figure this out, and everybody's learning some new things. Are there other sources that are saying different things, just kind of balancing? It seems like what you're presenting is, from those that are studying this well. Are there other sort of counter arguments to this?
Of course. And I think it's important to take that all into consideration. There's a recent article I read that said that maybe one of the difficulties in choir and choral singing is that we are such a loving group, which I think is true, right? We're full of hugs and we become family, and that maybe we are seeing some of these things that they're attributing to aerosols are actually attributed to like this physical connection. That I think could be a real possibility. That article didn't cite the other kind of cases, which I would hope that it would. So, but I think we're seeing all of that, and it's always a risk to reward ratio, right? Depending on where you are, and there's always a risk to everything we do. So these scientists were saying there's no safe singing. I would say there's probably no safe anything ever, right? So we have to keep in mind what our risk to reward is there, and I'm happy to send some of those as well if people are interested.
Excellent. Yeah, we can put out a post on some of these other resources that we may have later on, and I'm sure others have some as well. One asks, what are maybe some of the contemplative elements we could add in to worship? I know I'm the one that brought that up, but any thoughts on that?
No, I would love to hear what you think. I know there have been some people that have moved towards a more taizé and their online kind of thing, that call and response. And I think that could be done without singing, kind of things. I think that the music being played, hymns, we know even in like Alzheimer's patients that these hymns read deep. They're things that when we can't remember someone's name, we can still remember the words. So something being played with a flute or a piano and meditational moment, with reflective, maybe with a scripture or a prayer or insightful words, I think could be interesting, and still give us that connection. I think music staying in the church is vital right now. For me, we do some spoken word services, but I would be interested in seeing, what other ways we can keep music and keep that kind of connection. You may have great ideas too, Matt. I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Man, yeah. I can envision several things, particularly if we have, well, not particularly, as I'm imagining it, if we have recorded music on a screen or recorded music playing. You could even do that on phones if you don't have screen. Because part of what I'm imagining is even when we're back, only a certain percentage are going to be back for months and months. And so our kids, our elderly, those on taking chemo, I mean, any number of people are going to be still at home. So how do we continue to provide in-person experiences while remembering those that cannot gather? I think it would be if we can't include those who can't gather, then we probably shouldn't gather. I think that's maybe the answer some churches might have to take that are largely older or whatever. So what would it look like to have guiding questions, of when did you first hear this song, or what is this song? I'm trying to think of a song that would help that. What is your memory of this song? Even just, gasp for some churches, but just 3, 4, 5 minutes of silence and saying with some guided questions to be thinking through, when you think about gathering together, who comes to your mind in your life that you've gathered together with? Give thanks to those who have passed and praise God for those that are in your life. Who do you miss that's not here right now? How has God been faithful to you in this? I mean, any number of things. Just like worship, singing often elevates us kind of beyond our daily grind, what's dry, and it lifts our soul. What are questions, what are prayers that can help us with that same lifting that guide us into God's presence? Again, I think there's a lot of other things out there, but those are some things that come to my mind. If we can't respond in song, that we're guiding people to respond to God, because that's what the words of our song are meant to do. That's my thought.
I love that. I think there's so many, beautiful practices that may come out of that as well, and uplifting.
Yeah. Steve Wells says, introducing silence is hard. I definitely think you've got to introduce silence incrementally. And if people, and particularly it's a larger group, that may not be feasible for every congregation. For some, it may be welcome, but to sit in 3 or 4 minutes of silence in a group of 100 or 50 people, there's going to be a lot of coughing there. We might actually increase, I don't know, because everybody will start clearing their throat and coughing.
I do think that that's, where this musical interludes could be could be useful in that. And I think this idea of moving towards a hybrid as opposed to being all or nothing, we know nothing's really all or nothing right now in our new world. So this idea that, even if you're back, your whole choir isn't back, maybe they are showing us that virtual choir live during church. I think there's going to be many hybrid options.
And if you're not able to do a virtual choir, it doesn't mean you can't borrow someone else's virtual choir with permission, I'm sure, but much of this is out there and available. That would be a possibility.
There's some joint virtual choirs too, where they're just calling for all peoples. So that could be something that if you don't feel comfortable doing it, you could connect your people to that so they still feel a part of that. I'll try to spread that as well.
Once upon a time, I just pressed play on a CD when we had no contemporary worship, but our church wanted to try it. So we've done a lot of stuff in our past, that to make do. This is just one more. Sam asked about worshiping outside and just what you're hearing. I mean, if it's outside, meaning wide open, do pavilions or, any roof over our head, does that affect any of this? Any thoughts on that?
Sure. I've been really fascinated with that as an option. There's still not a lot of research, honestly. Dr. Halstead said she was encouraged about it because you can get further away. You can even use amplification systems so people can still hear. She said there was a barbershop quartet practicing on her front lawn and she felt pretty safe about that. But we don't know exactly, right? So it's your risk to reward ratio, I think, there, but it does seem like an interesting kind of option because you can get people further away. There's sunlight, hopefully, and fresh air and things that are moving, all of that. So potentially not as direct of a spread. I haven't read enough science to give like a good, for sure answer, but I'm really hopeful about it. I don't know, it seems kind of interesting. Just like at St. Paul's, we've got such a small space. It's going to be more challenging for us to get any singing happening than it will be in like a big auditorium, cathedral.
Yeah. And, one of the question is about proper spacing. So they're not going so far, or maybe I'm wrong. Correct me if I'm wrong. They're not going so far to say proper singing distance is 16 feet. They're really saying we really got to think about doing anything because we think it's 16 feet, but we don't have solid enough overall to know. And like you said, if you space 16 feet, 30 people over I'm a minister, not a math person. So I don't know how big that is, but that seems like a lot of space.
Yeah. Thanks for clarifying that, Matt. I think the answer is we just don't know enough. And I think what you're saying is exactly right. They think the spread is about 12 to 16 feet. So as people are looking at regathering right now, that's something to think about, but we just don't know. And so that's what makes kind of the unknown makes the safety concerns.
Yeah. Well, I'm looking, I think we have had a lot of questions come in. I don't see any new ones. Any kind of final thoughts as okay, we do have one that came in. How do we resolve tension, and this is a much bigger question, between screens, virtual experience with historic traditional architecture that may not be equipped with screens or willing to do that, or for many, many good reasons?
Yeah, I'm at a historic church of Waco. We have no screens that I can think of. We had trouble even getting wired for internet so that we could, go live because no one ever thought St. Paul's would go live. That doesn't seem like a thing that we would do. And here we are doing it. So I think that's real. And I think that's why there's not one answer to this, because it's going to look different community to community. It's going to look different church to church. And I don't know that virtual is the answer. Maybe it looks like, bringing in a church like that, bringing out a handbell choir that plays Great Is Thy Faithfulness, or, kind of if you're looking for more traditional kind of options in that, maybe it looks like having one singer as opposed to the congregational singing. So I think we just have to continue to be creative and to think about what our local experts are saying, what our congregation is needing, what we feel like, we can do in the moment.
That's excellent. What was that?
I had more answers.
Well, I mean, that's where we all are, right? I mean, we gather together, we ask questions, we get the best answers we can, and then we have to make decisions based on our context. And I think as we're trying to do, all of us, I think, maybe not all of us on our Facebook feeds, but all of us that are gathered, we're trying to extend as much grace as possible as well, of saying, here's some good information we think, but everybody's going to have to make this decision, and then we'll learn from what goes well, what doesn't go well. We have, pivot seems to be the word of the day. If I've heard that once, I don't think it can be a conversation on Zoom unless you use the word pivot. I think it's in the Zoom contract. But we're going to continue to do that, I think, for who knows how long. Any final maybe blessing or word of encouragement to those that are in the trenches making these decisions, listening today?
Yeah. I just will continue to keep this in our prayers. I think I think we were created to sing. I think we were created to sing praises. And I think this is unprecedented and challenging. So I hope that we'll keep music in the churches as we're reevaluating what that looks like. I would send my blessing in the form of the way that I close my classes, which is I taught at a public institution, university, for a long time. And I ended with go, be, do, which was my benediction over them. Go in the love of Christ, be who Christ has called you to be, and do God's will in the world. And I think that's all we can do right now, is do the best we can with what we know.
Lauren, thank you again for taking time to be with us. Blessings on you and your family in this time. Thank you all for joining us. We appreciate you. We'll be back together at 2 for those who can join us tomorrow with Dr. Mandy McMichael, and we'll look forward to that. Thanks, Lauren. Have a good day.
Bye.